Howdy everybody, I'm Brian, and I'm here to talk about horror movies.
Coming soon to this theater.
Today we're going to be discussing the 2019 adaptation of The Color Out of Space, the classic H.P. Lovecraft story, one of his absolute finest. I know it's Stephen King's favorite, and I'd have to say it's probably my favorite too. It's directed by Richard Stanley, and that is a name that will be familiar to many a horror movie fiend. To say that Richard Stanley is an interesting figure is something of an understatement. The man is really sort of a fascinating, almost shamanistic figure. He grew up in South Africa, apartheid-era South Africa, was raised by a very left-leaning hippie mother who encouraged his interest in the arts. Her favorite author actually was H.P. Lovecraft. And so the young Richard Stanley was introduced to Lovecraft's work at an early age. He's kind of like me in the sense that he grew up reading war and horror comic books like Creepy and Eerie, and he wanted to become a comic book artist when he grew up. Unfortunately, he couldn't draw, so worth a damn. And so he became a filmmaker instead, and a very interesting one at that. Stanley cut his teeth directing music videos, most notably for the legendary gothic rock band Fields of the Nephilim, who were led by Carl McCoy, who is a very interesting shamanistic figure in his own right. Both of them well-read on all manner of occult esoterica and heavily influenced by the work of Austin Osman Spare, Aleister Crowley, and others. I'm assuming that these two really must have clicked, and the videos that they made are full of arcane, often macabre imagery, and showcase Stanley's talent for wildly atmospheric production design on a low budget. I don't know if it's still there, but Stanley's MySpace page was just incredible. To say that he's an interesting individual really is an understatement. I missed a chance to meet him in New York City over a decade ago, and I've been kicking myself in the ass ever since. Stanley first broke into the horror scene in 1990 with Hardware. And, man, when this came out, there's just no way to properly convey how much this movie blew my mind. I mean, it was just the coolest thing out there at that time. I mean, it had cameos by the aforementioned Carl McCoy, Iggy Pop plays the local DJ, Gwar appears on a TV set at one point, and also there is an appearance by the great one himself, Lemmy from Motorhead.
Used to be okay down here, you know that? Used to be you could walk down here anytime. Go out on a Saturday night with just brass knuckles, nothing else. Maybe a piece of wood or something, piece of pipe, you know what I mean? Nowadays, you need a gun all the time. Fucking bunch of shit what these people are doing to the fucking world.
Well, Debbie Harry, who originally asked to do it, had to drop out because of a concert date. And we managed to locate Lemmy, who's drinking in some bar in Chalk Farm Road. And basically he agreed to do it in exchange for a bottle of Jack Daniels. It was a tough day for him because he had to start early.
Now, if that don't sell you on this movie, I can't do nothing for you, man. It's also got this really wonderful atmospheric score by Simon Boswell, and the soundtrack has some kick-ass songs by Ministry, John Lydon's Public Image Limited. I mean, in the year 1990, you just couldn't get any cooler. And though it couldn't be accused of being plot-heavy or even terribly original for that matter, it's about a sculptress who's stalked in her apartment by a killer robot left over from World War III. It packs a surprising punch. Not so much a case of style over substance, but style as substance. I think it's definitely worth checking out for any seasoned horror fan, if only because it's Stanley's debut feature. He followed that up with Dust Devil, about a figure that had haunted him in his dreams most of his life. A figure akin to Randall Flagg, the walking dude from Stephen King's novel The Stand. Despite being really badly edited, more like raped really, by the distributor for its home video release, it still cemented his reputation as one of horror's great up-and-coming directors. I mean, you really got the feeling that you were seeing the next Mario Bava or Dario Argento or George Romero, but with a totally fresh, unique flavor all his own. And then Hollywood came calling. When it was announced that Stanley would be writing and directing an adaptation of the H.G. Wells story, The Island of Dr. Moreau, horror fans like myself couldn't have been more elated. Unfortunately, the production was such a disaster that it's become something of a legend. The tragic events recalled in the engrossing documentary Lost Soul. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong, with stars Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer actually seeming to go out of their way to actively sabotage the project. The producers suddenly got cold feet, and they fired Stanley just a few days into production, replacing him at the last minute with John Frankenheimer. Stanley had a nervous breakdown as a result, and the resulting film was a complete fiasco. What might have been a benchmark horror film ended up being little more than a big-budget remake of Battle for the Planet of the Apes. It really is just a contemptible pile of shit. And so it looked like we had seen the last of Richard Stanley, until it was announced last year that he would be helming a production of H.P. Lovecraft's The Color Out of Space, and that it would be produced by the same people that produced Panos Cosmatos' Mandy. And so not only was he coming back, but he was coming back with creative freedom. No worries about getting fired from the set of his own movie there. And I was ecstatic when I heard this news, but also a little nervous. Or I should say, I felt a little nervous finally getting to see the film last night, because I was worried for Mr. Stanley. I was worried, like, God, what if he's lost it? Well, my fears were totally unsubstantiated, because Color Out of Space is a terrific horror film. Not only is it a terrific horror film, I would say that it is a bit of a triumph for Mr. Stanley. Not only did he make a very good Lovecraft movie, not only did he make a very great horror movie, boy, he has made something that I think is really quite special. I want to say instant classic, but I have to give it another look or two before I make that commitment. Since its initial publication in 1927, the story has been adapted by countless artists down the years in almost every conceivable medium. Comic books, radio plays, a computer app, and, of course, movies. Most notably in 1965 with the title Die Monster Die, starring Boris Karloff, and later on in 1987 as The Curse with Wil Wheaton. Both as horror films and as Lovecraft adaptations, they leave a lot to be desired. And that brings us to this most recent adaptation. Nicolas Cage plays Nathan Gardner, a loving husband and doting father who has just relocated his wife and kids from the big city, presumably New York, to scenic Arkham, Massachusetts, where he has inherited the family farm from his late father. He's very kind and understanding towards his kids, even though his daughter is into witchcraft and his son is always smoking weed with the hippie that's squatting on their land, played in a very inspired piece of casting by Tommy Chong. His wife, it's inferred, has recently fought off cancer and has had a double mastectomy, which, understandably, has left her feeling ugly and undesirable. And in a rather tenderly wrought scene, he tries making love with her, assuring her that he still finds her desirable. And that's when the meteor hits and their rural heaven slowly turns into a Lovecraftian hell. A visiting hydrologist from good old Miskatonic University, who is there to test the water table, discovers that it has been contaminated, and soon everyone and everything starts looking and acting very strange. It's a beautifully shot, sharply written, extremely well-acted tour de force that is easily the best Lovecraft movie to date. We still have yet to see a Lovecraft movie set in the time of the stories, because period pictures are typically expensive. But here we have a writer-director who not only understands and respects the source material, he knows precisely how to bring the original intent of the story to the screen. Lovecraft has always been notoriously difficult to adapt, But here Stanley has managed to capture the core, the essence of what Lovecraft is all about, a suffocating sense of cosmic dread. One of my favorite scenes is where the brother and sister realize what's happening to them, but they seem powerless to do anything about it. They know they need to get out of there, but their thinking process is already so muddled, they seem incapable of taking any action. And when they finally do... If you're looking for a contemporary jump scare movie, look elsewhere. What Stanley is going for here is a true sense of dread and horror, and he achieves it with a ruthless cunning. He uses Lovecraft's tale of the destruction of an American family to dredge up and spill his guts about his own worst fears. Like all of Stanley's movies, it feels intensely personal, like something only he could have made. One scene in particular, where two members of the family have been fused together by the color and turned into a single, grotesque creature, is absolutely hellish and genuinely agonizing to watch. Stanley cared for his mother when she was dying of cancer, and as someone who has some experience caring for a loved one with a fatal illness, this film has a particularly powerful resonance. Watching someone you love deteriorate before your eyes evokes both sympathy and horror. One half of you wants to stay, and the other half wants to run screaming, and he captures and conveys that with absolutely ruthless honesty. Now, you know a horror movie is working when you feel it in your body. And there were times in this film where I felt like I had a meat hook in my guts. The acting is generally superb, and truthfully, none of this really would have worked without a solid cast to hold everything together. Even Tommy Chong, who, you would think would be completely miscast in a Lovecraft movie, fits in beautifully. Nicolas Cage is at his most Nicolas Cagey. And you really wouldn't want to have him any other way. He's got a pretty good freak-out scene in this, too. I mean, what's a Nicolas Cage movie without a good freak-out scene? So yeah, to summarize, Color Out of Space, amazing Lovecraft movie, virtuoso horror filmmaking from a genuine auteur, a triumphant comeback for Richard Stanley. He's made some interesting movies in the past, but this is his first genuine classic. There are plans to make 2 more Lovecraft movies. He's planning a Lovecraft adaptation trilogy. Next up is the Dunwich Horror. Excellent choice. What the third one is going to be, that hasn't been announced yet, because evidently there are a bunch of Lovecraft adaptation films coming up, and, I don't know if he's going to have to change his plans. If there's an At the Mountains of Madness movie coming out at the same time he's planning one, well, that wouldn't be very good now, would it? Currently it is available via download and streaming services. Definitely check and see if it's playing at your local art house theater. If you're lucky enough to have one, this is a movie that you definitely want to see on a big screen with a great sound system, if possible. This is your man Brian, signing off. Stay spooky, boils and ghouls.